Hello, this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you from the beautiful Rogue River Valley in scenic Southern Oregon, where we are meeting today with the Walter Russell Secret of Light group, as always. And we're going to talk a bit today about Real Alchemy by Robert Bartlett. As you know, in this series, we often talk about the transformation and transmutation of the human body and of the cosmos through different processes. And really the main process is what could be considered alchemy. So today we're going to cover Robert Bartlett's book, as you can see over here in the collage. Let me go ahead and share screen so you can actually see that. Can everybody see that now? Can everybody see? Okay. So we're going to talk a bit about this book over here in the right-hand side, which is called Real Alchemy by Robert Bartlett. I took the course from Robert Bartlett. He has, if you go to spagyrics.com, I think, or spagyrics.org, you can find his work and you can find his website. The book that he wrote is really his perspective. It's his history and his concepts. But he comes from a very rich tradition. This is Robert Bartlett here. And he learned his methods of alchemy from Frater Albertus here. This is Frater Albertus. He is from the Amarok school that was located in Santa Clara at the Egyptian site. I lived very close to that site for quite a few years and visited that site, and I'll talk a little bit about that when we get to that portion. So from Frater Albertus, that's what Robert Bartlett learned from, and he comes from a rich tradition that actually started with the man up here, which is who we call Trismegistus. Now, this fellow, you know, has been seen as many aspects, and we're going to talk a bit about that in further detail. But one thing that he was supposed to have brought forth was the Emerald Tablet, and within the Emerald Tablet was the basics of alchemy. From Trismegistus came Paracelsus, then came Newton and Robert Boyle, and later, and we're going to talk about what their achievements were and what their contributions were. But when we really get down to Hermes Trismegistus, what he really brought forth was that it is hermetics, as above, so below. So this is kind of a picture of what as above, so below would represent, meaning that what takes place in the heavens also takes place on the earth, and what takes place on the earth also takes place in the heavens. So as we talked a little bit currently of the history of alchemy, we also are going to talk about the Neterus, or the Neterus, as talked about in biogeometry, which is from the Egyptian history of alchemy. These are the beginning of the nature spirits. Within the ideas of the Neterus, we can actually look back at some paintings that were done of the alchemical process, which actually show the ideas that this came maybe with Adam and Eve, with the sun and with the moon, with the male and the female, the energies that focused around the tree of life. And the alchemists are recreating this concept that we are as one, which is the first rule of alchemy, which is all is one. And the second rule of alchemy is of polarity. So between this idea of all is one and polarity, we work with these Neterus, or these nature spirits that are put forth here, the four elements of fire, water, air, and earth. And the reason that we work with these elements is that we try to, within this picture here, the angelic spirit that we have is encompassed in a body, a form that within plants, animals, and minerals. And the idea is that we separate this angelic body out into its three parts, which is body, soul, and spirit. And as we separate these out, we then bring them back together to a reincarnated perfect state, which is what the alchemist tries to achieve. So the idea that we have this alchemical process that we can do on objects or things or matter, but we can also do in a spiritual alchemical process is basically the gist of our discussion today. Again, what we're looking at today is from the book. I don't have any really extra material. It's really Robert Bartlett's view, and it's covered in the book Real Alchemy by Robert Bartlett. Any questions before I move on? All right. So let's look at the history of alchemy. From what Robert Bartlett says, the origin is actually unknown. Some say it's from Adam to Noah. Some say that fallen angels traded sexual favors to teach it to them. And others say that it started with Atlantis. And others say that extraterrestrials brought it to Earth and taught us. So there's many different varied views on its origin, but all really have to do with some other force bringing it in and being taught throughout the ages. The first real known accounts of alchemy we have are from ancient Egypt, in which a theocratic priesthood who studied the operative powers in the universe, the Neterus, or nature forces. And those were from the first slide I showed on the collage. This Neterus, or nature forces, is actually elaborated upon by Ibrahim Karim in biogeometry, in which he calls them the netters, the N-E-T-E-R, which is that they also have a net that they cast. And he says this is a pharaoh energy, a design language of shape is a design language. So this is where we get within biogeometry the idea that the geometry is a design language of shape, and that shape has a resonance and has a feature that can bring life into existence. So within ancient Egypt, there's different periods. There was the Pharaoh period, which we just discussed a bit. The second was a Ptolemaic period, which is from Ptolemy in Egypt. And this really started in 300 BC with Alexander the Great, where he came in, and I don't know if many people are familiar with Alexander the Great. His teacher was Aristotle, whose teacher was Plato, whose teacher was Socrates. So Alexander learned alchemy from Aristotle. As Alexander traveled throughout the Europe and the East, he brought forth many ideas that he found in these other areas. And then once he got to Alexandria, he brought those together at the Library of Alexandria, where he created the Hermetic philosophy congealed, and Isop worship spread to Rome. So as Alexander came into Egypt, the ideas of Egypt began to actually expand out into Rome and into Europe. So this is where the Library of Alexandria was established. Now, Roman Egypt was different a little bit than Ptolemaic Egypt, in that in 290 CE, which is after the Common Era, which is 290 years after Christ, supposedly, Rome converts to Christianity. Alchemy produces alchemical gold, and Emperor Diocletian becomes fearful. He becomes fearful because as people begin to produce alchemical gold, it really has an effect on the economy. And he really didn't like that effect that was having on the economy. So whether or not you believe that alchemy can create gold from lead, there was people that were fearful that it was being done. He passed an edict to destroy all text and manuals dealing with the manufacture of alchemical gold. So this is where we get a lot of this, idea that the Library of Alexandria was burned down, different ideas of why it burnt. But one of the reasons was that Diocletian did pass this edict that all manuals dealing with the manufacture of alchemical gold be destroyed. In 325, after the Common Era, Rome officially became a Christian nation or a Christian body. In 391, Emperor Theodosius ordered the destruction of all pagan temples. So we've gone from a time of this alchemy, of Alexander, of hermetics, into a Christian nation of duality, where we now do no longer want the ideas of hermetics, but we want to make sure that all the history of this hermetic tradition is destroyed in what he would call the pagan temple. So this is when we lost, the Delphi, the Oracle of Delphi. Many of these things were destroyed during this time. And this is when the Library of Alexandria was finally destroyed by fire. The alchemists that were there migrate to Muslim territories, since they were, these weren't Christian territories. They weren't overseen by Rome. And the Chimia changed to Alchemia. So Chimia really means the black land, which comes from Egypt, which means that they saw the soil, the Greeks saw the soil in Egypt as being very dark, very black because of the sediments, and they called it Chimia, which is where we get the idea of chemistry. Now, when it moved into the Muslims' lands, they added the al to it, which is like Allah, which added a god definition to Chimia, and so it became alchemy or alchemia. And after this, the Dark Ages began in Europe. So this is the brief history up to the Dark Ages. Now, in 800, after the Common Age era, the Muslims invaded, and they brought with it the knowledge of alchemy. So the Muslims invaded into Spain, into different parts, and they brought with this the ideas of alchemy, and it spreads into Europe. Now, in Europe, it took about 500 years for the Pope, who's the head of the Christian Church in Europe in 1310, to Pope John the 22nd prohibits alchemy. Again, 20 seconds is 2 2s, which is polarity. And in 1404, King Henry IV makes gold making a crime against the crown. So every time we see this, it's kind of strange that the idea that the alchemists could make gold from baser metals is always kind of looked at as nonsense. But it seems awful strange that all the rulers of the nations always outlaw it and have to make edicts saying that it can't be done. And again, the reason that the King Henry did it was he also believed it was going to make the economy of the crown unstable.
It's different than the Catholic Church?
Well, the Catholic Church is the Christian church in the sense so all Catholic means is a universal church. That's what the word means. But the
Catholic was the Luciferians.
Well, again, they're all Christian in nature, and I don't know if they're all Luciferians. I mean, that's again what Catholic means is universal. And so where it started and where it ended up and what it became, there's all different phases of spiritual energies that pass through those periods based on.
I just had to add that to the video. I'm sorry.
That's okay. But that it all depends on what's moving and what energies are moving and what we focus our attention on. So by 1493, which is about 93 years, almost 100 years after this, Paracelsus revolutionizes the alchemical art, and he stresses alchemy's use in medicine. So since Paracelsus was a physician and also an alchemist, he began to use the ideas of alchemy in medicine. So we've moved kind of away from just purely this idea of gold making, of the transmutation of base metals into higher metals, to actually begin to use the properties of alchemy in the biology of people and in the physician's way to help and heal people. And by 1541, he was possibly murdered. And he wasn't murdered by the Rosicrucians, but the Rosicrucians at this time picked up the study of alchemy. And by 1627 to 1691, we had the introduction of Robert Boyle, who talked about the philosophical and the unphilosophical. So within the philosophical would actually be the science, would be the spiritual side of alchemy, and the unphilosophical would be the science side of alchemy. So modern chemistry began. So, we had Robert Boyle and Sir Isaac Newton at this time. And modern chemistry begins in 1660 in the Royal Society in England. So when we study, say, Newton's work, he was an alchemist, but he was also a scientist. His alchemical work, which he did most of, is actually suppressed and forgotten, and only the science side is seen. So we did see Newton as an alchemist, as a true hermetic, but that side of his work was never really explored as the Royal Society came in and really wanted to begin to see modern chemistry, which is really more of an idea of death and dissection, and to reduce and reductionism within the components of alchemy. So by 1800, alchemy is almost a lost art. So from the time of the Royal Society forming and begins modern chemistry in 1660, within 200 years, it's gone. It's almost a lost art in Europe. In the US, in 1900s, Amrock, which is really where Frater Albertus comes from, which is started by, I think Spencer Lewis, or Lewis Spencer, forget what his name is exactly, but he's the one who started the foundation. And he got a charter from the European contracts and the Order of the Rosicrucis, which is the Rosicrucians. So in 1900s, we have this Amrock started, and actually, this is when the society was formed in Santa Clara, and a building built, a very wonderful building, which had a planetarium, it had an alchemical lab, it has a ancient Egyptian museum that's still there that has lots of, it's one of the largest collections of Egyptian antiquities east of the Mississippi, I believe, and it's very, very impressive. Unfortunately, the rest of the facility is in disrepair. And when I
How
moved,
did they get them? They stole them?
no, they paid for them. I don't think they stole them. I mean, if you think that, yeah, I mean, you can say they stole them. They got them from antiquities dealers, but they did purchase them, and it was all on the up and up. Actually, Lewis went to the Holy Lands and did a book on Jesus and on some of the ideas, and interviewed quite a few people, and he came up with his own ideas of who Jesus was and what Jesus did. And so a lot of his alchemical work, there's a large library at Amrock in Santa Clara, and lots and lots of text and lots of ancient texts are held in that library. Like I said, when I lived there, I started to attend, but then COVID hit and they closed down all personal meetings and went to only Zoom meetings, and I kind of lost interest. And then after I found out that the alchemical lab was in disrepair and the planetarium was in disrepair and not being used anymore, I kind of lost interest also. So in the 1940s, Frater Albertus, so most of these alchemists that come from the Rosicrucian or Rosy Cross tradition take on the term frater. He splits from Amrock and becomes a Paracelsus Society in the 1980s as an accredited Paracelsus college. And this is where Robert Bartlett learned from Frater Albertus. So Robert Bartlett comes from the Amrock tradition. He learned from Frater Albertus at the Paracelsus Society in the 1980s. In 1984, we have the death of Frater Albertus. The efforts were transferred to French Philosophers of Nature, or FPN, and that closes in the late 1990s. So we actually see the death again. We saw it in the 1800s, and in 200 years later, the alchemy is almost a lost art again. And so what Robert Bartlett says, so the 2000s come, the internet comes, and the internet is the new library of Alexandria. Now, we can say that, that the internet is not what it is, but again, we're sharing on the internet, we're sharing the ideas of alchemy on the internet. So we are actually expanding the use of the internet to actually, again, teach alchemy as a art.
It's all there, but just not all indexed, actually. Everything is there, but you can't get to it.
Yeah. And so So this is, again, Robert Bartlett's history, his kind of knowledge. Again, like I said, I took a course from him. He mainly, gives 3 courses at his property in state of Washington. There's one on plant alchemy, animal alchemy, and mineral alchemy. And I would highly recommend his work. He's a great guy. He and his wife do a super job, and I would highly recommend it. Any questions before I move on to the actual work in Real Alchemy?
You're talking about Bartlett himself.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, I know this is the history from the book, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah. Do you think he looked at Steiner at all?
Well, yeah, when was speaking with him, yeah, he looked at Steiner, but it's I would say
Because,
that,
I'm thinking Steiner with the way that he showed people how to grow plants, you know what I mean?
yeah, within Steiner's work, within anthroposophy,
He would have a knowledge because he knew when to plant, the moon cycle, all those things. So
Mm.
to me, that's part of alchemy as well, because if you don't start from the forces,
mhm, and yes, and there are other players in here. These are really more of, like I said, from
Yeah.
Robert Bartlett's view, how he learned it and where it came from and what his tradition was. So it kind of sets a context for what we're going to talk about going forward. Any other questions or comments? All right. So we're going to move on here to the next slide, which is the Verba Secretorum Hermetis, which is really kind of, this idea of the Hermetic tradition and where some of the theories of alchemy come from. So again, this is from the book. Perhaps the most concise of alchemical theory acknowledged by adepts from all ages is the famous emerald tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. And we showed that picture on the very first collage of Hermes and this emerald tablet. Legend has it that this tablet predates the biblical flood and was inscribed by Thoth himself on a large plate of alchemically produced emerald. So when we talk about Thoth, that's actually sometimes associated with Apollo, which is kind of the bringer, the thing between man and gods, who's brought forth these ideas. And on the emerald tablets is inscribed some of the rules of alchemy. Now, the original emerald tablets are no longer in existence. We do have reconstruction. So as we look down here on the left-hand side, this is an imaginative 17th century depiction of the emerald tablet from the work of Heinrich Kuhnrath in 1606. And if you can see, the people are down here, and this is rather a large tablet that's being inscribed. So again, this is just an imaginative work. It has, it's not real. It's just kind of showing what their concepts were of it. Over here is what many people see on the internet, which is a reconstruction of what the emerald tablet is believed to have looked like.
It was made of emerald?
Yes, well, alchemical emerald. So just as they produced alchemical gold, this was an alchemically produced emerald in which these topics were written down on.
And if we had our wonderful technology of today, we know that, oh, this is alchemical, but this is real?
Well, I mean, yes. I think that I don't know if we would or not from that. I mean, we produced all kinds of false gems today. We produce false emeralds and false rubies and all kinds of false stones today that look similar. I think the idea that, from true alchemy is that alchemical gold could not be produced, right? This is what the Pope and the King of England both outlawed.
And we don't trust them.
Well, the idea is that it may not have been back then able to tell the difference, because again, if this is transmutation, if the ideas of transmutation and of the abilities to change these base metals, it may not have been able to be detected. I don't know. Go ahead, Cosmic.
Yeah, I just want to add another level in terms of the Fool and that whole process, because I like the multiverse, multi-level in terms of meaning, that it's about lead and gold on one level, on the manifest level, but this is a story about another process too that is analog to converting lead into gold, but it's not that, you know, the whole tarot and getting into the metaphysics of it all and getting that connection too is, I think, is because that's more fun for me.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that, you know, that's where people went, that, you know, the idea that maybe the first alchemists were really, you know, concentrated on this lead to gold. But as you become probably more disassociated with the earthly existence, right, as with the personality, you begin to actually see the true benefits, right, of what this changing of lead into gold is. And it becomes a spiritual process as well. And that's what we're going to talk a bit about as we move on here. Any more questions?
I'm thinking,
comments?
oh, well, it's just a thought. He could have been from the third ray, so he would have chosen emerald because it's green. And yeah, I'm just thinking that
When you're
It's the
saying
heart.
Hermes,
It's the heart.
Hermes.
That's the key
Hermes
to
is-
all of that. That's what the Wizard of Oz and everything is really speaking to, is that's 555, 555 hertz is the color green. But it's fundamentally, it's all speaking about the center, right? That's because that's just in the visible spectrum, it's just the center of between red and blue. But all of this, the Emerald City in the Wizard of Oz, talking about that color because of the color, though, because the color is a geometry, geometry is a number. But that's, again, these are the first principles. This isn't the stories that all these different levels of consciousness get to entertain, these different levels of stories that, but it's all talking about the first principles, but it takes different forms at different fractal scales of that heartbeat, because the heartbeat is a fractal waveform. And it's really important as it relates to cardioid and cardiac, and what the Mandelbrot set is talking about, and what the form that takes is that cardioid form is very important to understand. It's got the oid in it. Oid means to see.
I just think that it's green for however we perceive it, because it was a message to whoever would come later that it's from a certain ray and it's resonating a certain way, and it will attract the people that are part of that stream, if you like. Okay, that when they look at it, they will be able to build on it or whatever. That's just what I think, but you know.
It's just like photosynthesis, right? And really understanding in nature what the green is representing is that's a color that's already in the plant, so it reflects it, right? And understanding what that back and forth is too in terms of nitrogen, because that nitrogen again is the CHNO 4-ness, right? That nitrogen is a center. But to really get why it's in the center of the tenet magic square and what tenet is speaking to, but yeah, it's all speaking to this. The mean green machine, it's mean is in meaning. Mean is the half, it's the center, it's the midpoint. And which is what pyramid means, is fire in the middle. Right? That's all with because that's what my model's in, it's in the middle of that form.
Wasn't the Wizard of Oz that yellow brick road? Was that Emerald City? That's what we're talking about, the Emerald City.
Well, that goes back to the gold, the earlier they did the gold, or going to the gold, is understanding what the G is the seventh letter in the alphabet, but what the golden mean really represents, and why you got 5 fingers, why you got 5 appendages. Those are fractal forms too, right? Because that's how the matrix works, is fractal. But the golden mean, it's the yellow brick rolled is a golden mean spiral into the center, which is the heart, right? That's again, the lion is the heart, the Tin Man wanted a heart, right? The Scarecrow wanted a brain, which is the heart. And we don't get that. We think this is the brain and this is a trap. This is a prison.
And that's why within alchemy, we're actually looking at how we can transmute, right? How we can actually begin to bring in these different resonances and force and energetics to begin to see a different way of looking at the world and ourselves within that world. And So within the verba secretorium hermetis, it is true, certain, and without falsehood that whatever is below is like that which is above. As you remember the picture from the collage of the tree with both mirrored images, and that which is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the one wonderful work. As all things are derived from the one, all things are derived from the one, only thing by the will and by the word of the one, only one, who created it in his mind. So all things owe their existence to the unity by the order of nature, and can be improved by adaptation to that mind. Its father is the sun, its mother is the moon. The wind carries it in its womb, and its nurse is the earth. This thing is the father of all perfect things in the world. Its power is most perfect when it has again been changed into earth. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, but carefully and with great judgment and skill. It ascends from earth to heaven and descends again, newborn, to the earth, taking unto itself thereby the power of the above and below. Thus the splendor of the whole world be thine, and all darkness shall flee from thee. This is the strongest of all powers, the force of all forces, for it overcometh all subtle things, and can penetrate all that is solid. For thus was the world created, and rare combinations and wonders of many kinds are wrought. So again, as we talk about the one and only one who created in his mind, as we've talked before, consciousness of the idea of mind, that all that surrounds us is mental, is mind, is the one. And the idea that we are one, and as we get into alchemy, we begin to separate those subtle bodies. This is where we're leading to in this discussion within this book. So this is, hence I am called Hermes Trismegistus, having mastered the three parts of the wisdom of the whole world. What I have to say about the masterpiece of the alchemical art, the solar work, is now ended. The alchemist always admonishes their students, know the theory first before attempting the praxis or the practice. They say you must walk in the book of nature to understand our art. The alchemical concept of life and matter lies at the opposite pole of that of the current scientific community.
Sorry.
Science is trying to find out how matter created life. Alchemy states that life created matter. Alchemy affirms that at the origin, there is consciousness. Consciousness is the need to be of the absolute. In order to satisfy this need, consciousness created life, and in order to evolve, life created matter. So this is very contrary to what science says today, right? But it's at the root of what we've studied so far in Walter Russell, within any of the other studies that we've looked at, is that consciousness is the one. And from that one, we create the many. And we create the many through transmutation and creation through these different waveform technologies, through our body that was created through consciousness, not that the body created. So within modern scientism, the body, the brain creates the mind, which creates the consciousness, right? That we came from a cell that was unconscious or didn't have consciousness, but somehow that body grew and developed consciousness. They don't really have, I think Rupert Sheldrake calls this the hard problem of scientism, right? Is that how did consciousness ever evolve from non-consciousness, to where the alchemist says, no, that whole paradigm is completely false, that we must first have consciousness, and then from that we create biology. So this statement that I just read was from Jean Dubois of the PON, which was the French organization we talked about earlier in 1992. Any comments or questions before I move on to the next slide?
Yeah, I would love to put the toy back in here again,
Mhm.
because this is so important in terms of one, the circle,
Mhm.
right, being consciousness, being the monad,
Mhm.
but that above and belowness, right, is that's speaking to the duality in this form, but then that form also has a mirror on the underside.
Mhm.
It's also, and this again gets into all of this, the blackness and the whiteness, right, is that spirit part, that reflection, which is the numbers in the sacred forms, that goes through the water, which is what all of this is,
Mhm.
right? But that comes through. This is so important, because this again is that 90-degree relationship, right? Because that's what all of music is everything has that 90-degree, because it's all holonomic or holographic, which is the heterodyne and the interferometer, which is all mirrors, right? That's what the holograph is based in, is mirrors. But to really get with that 90 degrees, and what I'm ultimately here to show is that that's numbers, that it's embedded within a cubic structure of numbers, that 90 degrees happens through this eightness of the chessboard fundamentally, or the planet Mercury. And the planet Mercury is Hermes Trismegistus, right? Mercury is just the Roman version of that same dichotomy between the heart and the brain, because that's everything, right? It's this masculine feminine war. It's all between the heart and the brain, and these cycles in time of, the fall of man being fundamentally the inversion of the feminine force, or the feminine essence. But that's what all of this is really speaking to. And this is really, I just love it because it's so simple and it's a toy, right? But it is so profound to get how this works at this manifest level, because this is kind of what the noetic archaeology is speaking to, is when you can do this in the manifest level and you understand the fractal. This is where I'm saying my work will never be weighed, measured, or counted, but we can talk about how it manifests in this form. And that reflection, though, is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something you'll never see, but I have to use your words, the bird words, right, and imagery and toys, to be able to try and convey what's on the other side of the veil, what's on the other side of the eye of the needle, is something very profoundly simple and profoundly beautiful in terms of music, right? Because that's the key to really where I'm coming from, and why I get so excited, is the musical aspect of all of this. Because these are all stories, and that's great, but it is something that is so basic in terms of to really see what the divine intelligence is, because we're in the artificial intelligence. That's what the masculine side is. And the divine is the feminine side, right? We're in that, but to get a glimpse of what that feminine, because again, I see it as that's what we're moving into in terms of heaven on earth, is that feminine phase of looking forward. And this is really important, because we're going through time backward. We're looking forward instead of looking backward, right? Because right now we're fearful, we're in this scarcity consciousness, and we're moving out of that into something much more beautiful and looking to the future now, what I call the future now, away from the past now, because that's the past. And we understand the now, again, is how we get into that feature is living in, again, what the green represents is the center, the middle point, right? Or between the left and the right. And I think that's the lesson that we're all learning. Anyways.
You mentioned man and woman, though, not just.
Yeah, but it's not man and woman. You're a man, but you have masculine and feminine essence within you.
Mhm.
You're homosexual if you're imbalanced, right? Because that's
Okay.
kind of how it works.
But you said man and woman with a conflict, and I'm just not sure what you're referring to.
Yeah,
Men
we all have a conflict within us,
Mhm.
all of
between
it.
each other, I thought you said, and which I was.
Yeah.
That's the
Well, I think
question.
it's important to make that distinction. Again, I'm talking about something that will never be weighed, measured, or counted. Man and women, well, they can't be weighed, measured, or counted here anymore, either. But on the other side, I'm talking about the essence of what that really represents, because it's a lot of different things. The masculine and feminine essence, again, it's an archetype for the duality. To get that it's in everything. Just like I said, this has got a top and a bottom, but it also has a mirror to it, right? So everything has a double to it. Good has two sides. You can be a masochist and like pain. So I'd say that's bad, but somebody else would say that's good. So there's a condition I can show you in the manifest form that applies in the metaphysics, right? The unmanifest form, or the spirit of the law, because when we get to the spirit of the law is when we fix our DNA. When we fix our DNA, we get our superpowers back, right? That's really the key to it, is what these codes and what all the geometry is getting to the symmetry to where, and I love that video. I really hope that we can touch on that, what they're talking about in terms of the DMT when it gets so glossy, but they're all talking in terms of symmetry, right? Like they can't even remember it because it's so symmetric, because all of this is asymmetry. That's what the masculine essence is. It's distortion, right? But it's so pure in terms of the symmetry. This is where we need to get with our DNA to get it back to that state to where it's symmetric with the ether, right? So that it's congruent with, because that's where all the technology is. It's in our DNA. That's where it all came from, right? And it's in the paranormal if you want to see it in the manifest level. We just they don't give any credibility to that in academia or the cult that everyone's in. Right. But understanding it's already here, you can see it. It's just in select individuals. We all have that in our DNA, though. And it's because of the distortion, the deuterium, or whatever, the mercury that's causing transcription errors, because that's what the whole process of the telomeres and recreating our cellular, every 7 years we reproduce ourselves. Everything dies and reproduces. But that recreation process is creating errors. And again, that's the masculine form of binary, digital, synthesized, artificial intelligence, right? That's why our computers get hot, is because of irrational numbers and rounding errors. It's a distortion that it doesn't have to be. We can have algorithm paths that they pass each other just right. And that's what the 90 degrees is. That's a normal, right? If you have a curve, you can change curvature at 90 degrees and have no loss of energy. This is really important to understand the simplicity of 3, 6, and 9 and what the differential function is in calculus when you're taking a derivative of a function, what you're really doing in that process. That's a normal. That's what a differential is. It tells you the instantaneous rate of change at that point, but the curvature could be a multi-degree polynomial, right? It could be doing all kinds of crazy stuff, but it's that radius of curvature and that point of that instantaneous to really get what this is all about, what perception is really all about. Because that's the slope of a line, and the slope of the line is the pitch of a tone. It's music. And that's just two numbers, one over the other, one feminine, one masculine, one quality, one quantity. And that relationship, and I've posted that other video, Schauberger, to really get what that hyperbolic function is saying, and why the 1 over 1 is at 45 degrees gives you the square face of the cube and the root 2. But it's in the center of that parabolic, right? Because that's where hyperbole, the word hyperbole comes from hyperbolic function. Sorry. Everything's hyperbolic here. That's the nature of reality, is hyperbole. And that's in here. Again, this is the key to it all. And these four causal forces are really that 2C couple. The cross really is, it's in this form through the yin yang. And that's my model, right? To really get where inside out comes from, where hyperspace comes from, but in such pure and simplistic terms, nobody can see it. right? That's my problem, is nobody can see where I'm coming from because it's too simple. And that's hard, because I want to share it because it's so simple and so beautiful, but nobody even, they won't take the time to look because one, I'm just horrible at conveying it, I get too.
Let's move on a bit now
Yeah.
to the study of alchemy here.
But one just
Okay.
the skill is to be able to say it so that people can understand it. So it's not.
Yeah.
gibberish.
I don't have that. That's my problem, right? Is I go too fast and I use words that, because again, this is a process, is I've got to find words that you already have that mean something else, so I can connect with your consciousness, because that's the nature of what this music is. I can't connect with your geometry, with my geometry, because you got to have some form of that geometry already in you. So I got to use the geometry, and that's the words, and where the cube comes in, where the light comes in, right, is through the sound. But to really get that part of it, it's through the geometry is what the music is really doing. And that again is crystallization, because when the geometry is congruent with itself, it's symmetric. But when it's congruent with something else, it's another level of symmetry, but not of self, right? Of two. But it's a symmetry that they harmonize, or it's resonant or it's dissonant, right? It builds or it breaks down. That's Shiva Shakti. Sorry. That's simple.
Let's move on here a bit to alchemy and see what the alchemist says about this ideas of.
I'm sorry, I got to go at 2:00 too, just so I put it in the chat. But
Okay, so alchemy is an exploration of the involution of the absolute into matter, and is a subsequent evolution back to the source, the Ouroboros. So if everybody's seen this Ouroboros, the snake eating its tail, it's the idea of this absolute into matter and its subsequent evolution back. We've also talked about this within the Russellian model of the gravitational and radiation, or the contraction and expansion, that this is a constant cycle that is happening, that it's constantly moving into concentration and then back. This is what Russell talked about, that Newton didn't really explain when people just talk about the idea of the apple hitting the ground. There's only one side of the equation, one side of the reality, that apple would then dissolve and go back into space. So the idea of the Ouroboros, this snake eating its tail, is this constant exploration of the absolute into matter and its subsequent evolution back. There's a very old saying, the all is mind, the universe is mental. The all, or the one, is that which is the fundamental truth. The substantial reality, standing under the support of reality, this all is beyond comprehending, or the ability to truly name it. So we use a symbol and call it the all, the absolute, the divine, spirit, the force, the one, only one, whatever you choose. So no matter who you are, whatever you choose, it is just a symbol so we can talk about it. This is perhaps best described as infinite living mind. Only by mental creation can the all manifest the universe and still remain the all. For if a substance was used or acted upon, it would be separate, and the all would not be all. This is from the Kabbalion. What we call matter is only that portion of the all we apprehend through our senses. It is only a label we use to designate the manifestation of the all within the range of our limited sensory apparatus. All things are connected but separate only by their rates of vibration. Each of us is unique and complex waveform, though we also share many of the same harmonies. Like fingerprints, we are unique but all related. Modern science takes advantage of this fact in order to identify materials by their vibratory nature in the form of spectral resonance in visible light, infrared microwave waves, etc. Einstein once said, everything is energy. Beyond that is divine. We live in a vast ocean of energy, and everything seen and unseen is part of it. The alchemists called this energy the celestial fire, prima materia, the first matter, chaos, and many others. Everything around us, though it seems separate and different from ourselves, is one and only one. All is from one, is the first law of hermetics. So this is the first law, that all is from one. So once we begin to say us and them, right, we begin to differentiate. We begin to have the polarity. When we say all is us, we get back to the idea that all is one. There was a talk, I think yesterday on Alphabetic about Latiko and how as we begin to separate, right, as we begin to think that there's these forces outside of us that are different, that are acting upon us, we begin to then not relate back to how we create that force and how we're part of that and what that's there to teach us. And we begin to fight and put our attention on things, and we no longer see it all as one. The hermeticist sees all as one. That's the first law of alchemy. Any questions on the first law of alchemy?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Did, actually, relates to the first, previous page that you had up, but
Mhm.
consciousness
Mhm.
being first.
Correct.
And the church had that right.
The church had it right, and you mean the Christian church?
Yeah, yeah, religious churches.
Yeah. The church had it right, but the what the church might have had wrong was that that matter was flawed that was created.
Right, yeah. No, they had a lot of things wrong too.
Yeah, but they had it, and again, this was a separation that happened in that, Royal Science Academy, right? That once they began to just get into chemistry and lost the owl, right? The God portion that was put in by the Muslims, that was a spirit force, and they began, and it was really a conscious effort made by the church that said, the Royal Society, can take on chemistry and all things in the physical world, and we are going to just concentrate on the spiritual matters. So that was a bifurcation that was done in order to separate out these two. But now what we're finding in modern quantum physics, right, they've gotten down to the very basic of the separations, right, of the and what they found is that there is consciousness. That's really without the observer, there is no observed.
Yeah, the observer, I was waiting for.
And the observer is our consciousness, right?
Right.
So this is, once we define that the observer, without the observer, there is no observed, then we begin to look at, well, what are we observing? If we're observing it, then what are we creating, and how are we creating it, right? And we can get into, the ideas of, group consciousness or, collective consciousness, as talked about by Jung. And that as we get into these different communities, right, as we get into these different arenas that we can create in, we can then, as a mass, begin to create realities that are manifest in this 3D material world. But where we often get askew is that we don't see how we are part of that manifestation also. We just think it's being manifested outside of us. And once we take the idea that something's being manifest outside of us, we no longer have the first rule of alchemy.
Yeah, we're off the rails.
That all is one.
Hmm.
Any more comments or questions before we move on? All right. So the second law of hermetics, polarity. So, we talk about this, right? The polarity, this is where we get into the two poles, positive, negative, the male, female. And this is, once we get into the second law, we can no longer really, if we don't actually understand the first law, that all is one, we see polarity as a splitting away into two separates, not realizing that the two separates are still a one, just being split from the one. So the one reflecting on itself creates the first moment towards polarity. So once, this is what Cosmic was talking about, the mirror, right? The reflection, the reflecting self. Once we begin to reflect, we now have polarity. The division of the one into a most subtle spiritualized energy and dense material energy. The one divided into spirit and matter. Today we might call this energy and matter, which are the same. So when we talk about Steiner's work of spiritual science, right? Spirit and the matter, the spirit and the science, which is the matter. And we might call it energy, right? And matter. We might call it energy and science, right? So the idea is that spirit and energy and matter and, you know, what today is looked at. So what's the scientist concentrate on? He concentrates on the matter, right? He concentrates on the chemistry of the matter. He doesn't really look at, you know, the spiritual component that comes in. He doesn't look at the observer, the consciousness that is creating the matter. The second law of hermetics is the law of polarity. One of the earliest observations of nature was that everything has its opposite: day, night, male, female, hot, cold, wet, dry, yin, yang. The one divides into active and passive modes. With the active energy constitutes the energies of life, and the passive of the energies of matter. Consider the image of a sine wave, two opposite energies, but one wave. So as we talk about these energies of life and the passive and the passive one, the energy of matter, you know, we look back at Russell's work, which is really kind of the ideas of the male and the female. And you can say, what is the energy of life, right? What is the energy? You say, well, the female may be the energy of life, right? Because, you know, she has the baby. But in order to have the baby, you have to have the sperm come into it. So it's really the red that is the energy of life and the blue that is the energy of death. And this, and I don't mean to, you know, make any connotations of male and female, you know, men are life and women are death, but women are the expansive energy, right? The blue, the female pole, the expansion is what causes death. The concentration is what causes life. And as we move into this new era, the era of the feminine, as we've talked about, this is an expansive nature. As we have now concentrated into science, gone all the way as deep as we can into the very, very minuscule particles of the atom and so on. And once we got there, what did we find? We found consciousness, right? And now we're expanding back out. And as we go through this expansion, we're all going to feel these different energies, right? We're going to feel this energy that is not native to us, right? It's not native. We're not used to this energy. And it's probably going to feel very uncomfortable to most of us, to this expansive energy. But the idea of the alchemist, that we can identify this first, that all is one, right? As above, so below. This is all one. And it's not bad or good, you know, good or evil. It just is. This is just the nature of our reality of matter. And as we go forward, go ahead, Doug.
But the mirror thing,
Mhm.
It's certainly possible that while whoever it might be was looking into that mirror, that it could be behind the scenes, there's evil that has changed what the mirror looks like, and it's not, and
Again,
other ideas.
Again, the first rule is all is one. Whatever I see in the mirror is what I create. Okay, I mean, if once we get back out of all is one, and that there's these other things that are outside of us, we blow the first rule of alchemy. And all we're concentrating on is rule 2 of polarity, right? We forget rule 1 and we move only into rule 2. And what we're being told is that we have to consider rule 1 first. That's why it's rule 1, before we get to rule 2 of polarity.
But they've already put something in you that's doubt because of what you've seen, what you believe now from them corrupting the view of the
Again, anytime we use the word them, We are not in rule 1.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes,
We're in rule 2. So when we start saying them and not us,
yeah,
we are no longer practicing alchemy, right? We're practicing something else.
yes.
And so again, we're talking about alchemy and the rules that are behind that, and as above, so below. So this is the ideas that, within the Golden Chain of Homer, a book written in 1730 and highly esteemed by several generations of alchemists, called the active energy of celestial niter and the passive energy celestial salt. We call these the volatile and the fixed. These two modes of the one express an inherent polarity as well. So oftentimes I think what we look at is these ideas that we don't actually look at the celestial niter and the celestial salt, right? The salt's the body. The celestial niter, is this, this active energy. So when we talk about this niter, this, what does the egg do and what does the sperm do, right? Which is the active participant in that process? Yeah,
Sperm.
exactly. So this is what we're talking about here. We're talking about these ideas. It's not to say that, the egg has no value because it's negative and it's death, because that's where life comes from. Once this celestial niter hits the celestial salt.
And two negatives make a positive anyway. Or
So-
two positives make a negative.
So the ideas are that first rule is all is one. Second rule is polarity. And polarity is necessary for us to create. Polarity is a necessary thing for us to create our world of matter. It's neither bad nor good. It's just what needs to happen in order for us to have a 3D solid world of matter. Where we may make the mistake is that we begin to concentrate on the world of matter and forget the world of celestial fire, right? That we only concentrate on the world of salt.
And with the people with materialism.
Correct. Any more comments or questions before we move on to the next slide?
Is it at this point that, like the vibration, the pulse would be?
Well, the pulse.
No, because you know how the whole universe has like a pulse, and
Mhm,
we have a pulse, and
mhm. Yeah, and the pulse.
the pulse will get created soon if it hasn't shown up already.
And the pulse is really the idea of the in and the out, right? We talked about this with the
That
celestial,
cone,
Yeah.
like that.
and that's actually the celestial breath, right? The celestial pulse, right? So the heart contracts and then it expands, right? It contracts and then it expands, right? This is the celestial pulse. This is the heavenly pulse. So as the concentration, right, the sperm going into the ovum, right, from concentration to expansion, right? Once that sperm hits, single sperm, sometimes two, but usually a single sperm ignites this egg, then expansion occurs, right? So this is the pulse. This is what we see in both the heartbeat within the universe. This is just the cycle of the wave as it goes through its cycles from concentration to radiation or expansion, right? So these are the things we've talked about in the previous Russell videos. Any more comments or questions before we move on?
This is great that you're tying stuff all together, all the way back to Russell.
Mhm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But it will also, the heart thing, it just is always perplexing to me. It exists, not perplexing. I saw this video where they talk about that, like it started with the worm, the way a worm pulsates,
Mhm.
and it goes to the next step, and it builds into more celled animals, and then the heart's there, and then it goes further, and each one shows you how the heart, is adding on to it, and like everything came. They claim in this thing that we all have the same, our heart, we develop into a whole thing.
Mhm.
I think I explained it terribly.
But again, as we move from this concentration of mind into the heart. This is the difference that we're going to begin to experience this new world into where what's the mind do? It concentrates. What's the heart do? It does both. It contracts and it expands, right? So as we expand the mind, we're also going to expansion of the heart. We're in this expansion mode now of both. And we are going to begin to create not only, we're going to create, as we talked about in the Bailey videos, that we actually start with a thought form on the mental plane, right? We begin to create, but where we create from that mental plane has to come from a heart space, right? We still create with the mind. We're not really creating, we're creating through the heart, but the mind is actually the one that's putting forth the thought form. So where we had, like, say, with the Greeks, which were very totally mental, right? And then we went into the new age, as we talked about, from the ideas of spirituality and matter, right? Chemistry and Al. We lost Al, right? Al fell out. And we just went into Chem. And so chemistry is really what we're concentrated on today. As we move into this new realm, I believe we're going to drop the chemistry as much as just beginning to understand it as a function of the spirit, but not as the driving force of the spirit, right? This is where because we begin to think chemistry creates consciousness. No, consciousness creates chemistry, right? Creates body, creates matter.
Someone says that it creates consciousness. Who says that? What you just said?
All the scientific materialists say that.
Ah, right.
That man was, came out of the ocean, and he was a mindless protozoa or whatever. And one day he just started thinking, and started contemplating things, That's what, like I said, Rupert Sheldrake calls it the hard problem of consciousness for the scientific materialist. That's what it really boils down to in the end.
That's cool.
So now let's talk about the four elements, right? The energy of niter operates through the element of fire and air, right? This is like the igniter, it's the niter. Both are active in nature, but fire is the more active of the two. These are the volatile energies. The energies of matter, salt, operates through the elements of water and earth. These are the fixed energies. So we have the volatile, which is fire and air, and we have the fixed, which is water and earth. Water being the more active of the two. So within the volatile, we have fire, which is more active than air. And within the fixed, we have water, which is more active than earth. These elements have nothing to do with the material bodies of the same name. They are, in fact, energetic states. So what they're saying here, these have nothing to do with the material bodies of the same name. So when you look at earth, when you look at fire, these are energetic qualities. They're not material qualities. As early as 500 BCE, before the Common Era, the ancients called these four elements and recognized them as the essential qualities by which nature operates and is formed. The element of fire relates to the qualities of radiance, expansion, warmth, and light, anciently known as the hot and dry properties. So when you get into Chinese medicine, you get into these of hot and dry. Okay, this is fire and air. On the psychological level, fire relates to the superconscious mind. The element of air is penetrating, diffuse, movable, the wet and hot properties. Psychologically, air represents the self-conscious mind. The element of water relates to coolness, contradiction, mutable or change, the properties of wet and cold. Water is the perfect representative of the subconscious mind. The element of earth relates to the qualities of stability, rest, inertia, strength, and solidity, the dry and cold properties in the human economy. This is the physical body. So if you remember in our last discussion on Alice Bailey, as we stood at the midway point, As we stood on the ground, as the water met the ground, right? Remember this? And we stood in the air, which is the volatile component. So our feet are stable on what? They're stable on the fixed elements, right? Within the fixed elements. Our body is encapsulated by the air, and the fire is in our brains, right? The fire is in our head. This is how what we discussed in the treatise on white magic within the last one about how the magician stands at this midway point. That's where we are today, right? That's where as we stand here, we are at the jumping off point. And now we're going to look at alchemy as how we can use alchemy within this process of transmutation. Any questions before I move on from the four elements? So here we see the four elements, right? We see that these are symbols. These are what we call alchemical symbols for these elements. On one side, we have the celestial salts, which are the fixed elements we've talked about, right? Which are earth and water, right? So we have water, which is the more volatile of the elements, right? You put a line through it, and we get a less volatile element, which is the earth. We have the fire, which is the most volatile element. We put a line through it, we make it less volatile, and we have the air. From the earth and the water, we create the salt. From the fire and the air, we create the sulfur. And by the combination of these, we create the mercury, which, as Cosmic pointed out, is also known as Apollo, in Greek gods and mythology, and is also known as Hermes Trismegistus. And within our study of Alex Bailey, we talk about the sulf as the body, the sulfur as the soul, and the mercury as the spirit. Right? This is within alchemy, this is what we separate out from these elements, the salt, the mercury, and the sulfur. Within Aristotle's elements, and again, who was Aristotle? He was the student of Plato, who was a student of Socrates, and Aristotle was also the teacher of Alexander the Great, in which alchemy started. So within that, he creates a much more, but we see here the two triangles, right? As above, so below. Within the cube, we have earth, air, fire, water. We have dry between fire and earth. We have cold between earth and water. Between water and air, we have wet. And between air and fire, we have hot. So within this is also the cosmology of the Chinese medicine with, and which one's better or worse, right? There is no better. It really depends on what we need. If we have too much cold, we need more hot. If we have too much fire, we may need water, right? If you have too much wet, we may need dry. And so being able to understand what element we need at what time is really the key to understanding the dis-ease and how to actually alleviate those symptoms. So modern science agrees that there are four fundamental forces governing the activity of everything in our universe. And though they call them strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, electromagnetic force, and gravitational force, they are related to the ancient elemental qualities of fire, water, air, and earth, respectively. These elemental qualities and their mixtures form the vehicles through which the alchemical three essentials operate. They are the clothing which we interpret as our physical reality. Because we talked about the clothing of our physical reality, right? This is the energy clothed in the sheath of food, right? This is how we interpret our physical reality. Any questions on the four elements? All right. So what are the three essentials? The three essentials are the alchemical principles of sulfur, mercury, and salt. These are the three bodies that Alice Bailey talks about within the treatise of white magic, right? This is the body, the soul, and the spirit, right? Again, these terms are not the common materials we associate with these three words, such as table salt or the mercury in your thermometer. They describe subtle philosophical principles active in nature. Alchemical salt, or the body of a thing, provides the matrix wherein the sulfur and the mercury can act. So the body, right? This is what we talked about in Bailey. This is the personality, right? The body, the thing that we see, our avatar, right? This thing that walks and has this sensing body. This is where the other elements can act, right? This within the salt is where the sulfur and mercury can act, right? So it is a passive medium, the virgin earth, subject to the fixed energies of water and earth. The salt is influenced by psyche and instinctual forces of the subconscious, as well as the conditions affecting the various states of matter. The alchemical sulfur, or soul of a thing, conducts the volatile principles of fire and air, expressing consciousness, intellect, and the true will, or personal fire. Again, getting back to the idea of the fire in the head that we talked about last week, right? In Alice Bailey's work, the fire in the head, right? This is the true will, this is the intellect. Alchemy, Mercury, or the spirit of a thing, is the vital force of life force, and predominates in the elements of air and water, reflecting intellectual, instructional, and psychic energies. And we're getting back to the energies of things, right? Not that mercury is that mercury in your thermometer, or salt is table salt, right? These are the salts, right? These are the things that make the body work, right? These are what constitute this sheath of food that clothes these energetic qualities. It forms the link or bridge between the higher forces of sulfur and the lower body of matter, the salt. In mythology, Mercury is the messenger between the world of the gods and the world of mortals, the physical world, right? And so this is what Bailey talks about, that we have this idea of soul. We have the idea of body. What we're trying to do is bring the soul back into the body, because that's been separated. How do we do that? We do that through the use of spirit, the use of the God concept, the use of the divine concept. We bring those three things that are disunified into a unity. The energies of celestial night are often equated with the force of Kundalini, or spiritual forces of Indian philosophy. In alchemy, this is referred to as the secret fire in man. So celestial nitre is the secret fire in man. The energies of celestial salt are equated with the force of prana, or vital energy by the air we breathe. Prana is said to maintain physical life in existence. It acts at the instinctual and unconscious levels, as well as being influenced by cosmic cycles and other natural phenomena. So as we talk about vital force, right? Vital force, prana, the body, right? What makes us vital? What makes us alive? What makes us, have that vitality of life? It's the prana. So as we talk about the nitre, and so Kundalini, these are different between Kundalini and prana, right? The celestial nitre, spiritual force, right? The ideas of the prana, which is the bodily force. Any questions before I move on the three essentials or comments?
It's neat, well, about the air we breathe, like, so when we get more vital, we get more alive
Mm-hmm.
by breathing better, or,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's neat to see.
And this is why, so much with breath work that we talked about, right? How we breathe, which is, again, the cosmic pulse that we've talked about, right? The expansion and contraction. This is what Russell talked about with the breath, right? The cosmic pulse, the breath, and how that works, right? And how we have that center point of holding the breath, right? We've talked about that in previous discussions. So the three essentials, the function of the Kundalini Niter is to increase in humanity its sense of true self and true will. So that Kundalini, right, that fire, is to increase in humanity its sense of true self and true will by opening us to wider vistas of awareness. So through that Kundalini fire, we begin expansion of greater areas of awareness. At the lowest level of functioning, this is the self-centered ego. At its highest, we become aware of the divine nature. So within this celestial niter, right, the Kundalini, we can be on the very lowest spectrum. There are levels, right? The lowest spectrum is the consciousness, right? The personality, the ego, and on the highest is the divine nature. The effects of awakening the secret fire within constitute a true initiation into nature's mysteries, with attendant change to our perception of how nature operates. This is the direct experience of liberating interior knowledge. So it's an inner work, right? As we begin to ignite, right, this inner knowledge, right, we begin to actually experience this liberating work. The physical body is also changed and improved in functioning, constituting a genuine rebirth on spiritual and physical levels. The alchemical process seeks to fan this fire carefully with great judgment and skill. Again, I can't stress this enough, right? In all the work that we talk about and all the discussions we have, whether it be Bailey, Russell, or, alchemy, to jump into this unprepared as just, we are going to actually reap what we sow. So the less work we do before we jump into these concepts, the more that we don't practice careful judgment and skill, we're going to have an explosion, just as we will in the alchemical laboratory, right? In laboratory alchemy, the three essentials of body, soul, and spirit are most important because they provide us means of manipulating the elements. Many alchemists indicate that the primal elements are too subtle even for the most skilled artists, and that only nature can work at that level. The three essentials are the fruit of the elements, which man can manipulate even at the physical level. As the Polish alchemist Michael Sedgwick wrote in his New Chemical Light about 1600, what was happening in 1600, this is where we started getting the separation of chemical and alchem, and chemical and in chemistry. The three principles things are produced out of the four elements in the following manner. Nature, whose power is in her obedience to the will of God, ordained from the very beginning that the four elements should incessantly act on one another. So in obedience to her behest, the fire began to act on the air and produce sulfur. Air acted on water and produced mercury. Water, by its action on earth, produced salt. Earth alone, having nothing to act upon, did not produce anything, but became the nurse or womb of these three principles. So the earth is the womb, right? That is where all things, that's the medium, that's the petri dish in which all these other elements acted upon. It was the medium. That's why it's called Mother Earth. Any questions before I move on? So in summary, right, the salt represents the body or vehicle which allows expression of the other two essentials. Without the body, we cannot express the other two essentials. So what is essential? The body, right? The body is essential for us to express these other two attributes. We chose to be put into matter so that we could express these other two elements of soul and spirit. Without the body, we could not express soul and spirit in this 3D world. It is a principle of fixity, consolidation, and focus, the material basis or matrix. So what is the matrix? It's our body. That's the first matrix. The second matrix is how that body relates to other bodies, right? But the main matrix that comprises the major matrix is our own body. The sulfur represents the soul, the consciousness. It is a fiery principle brightness, the spiritualized male or female aspect of the Kundalini. Oh, no, it is the spiritualized male aspect of one. Kundalini, the character of a thing, the true colors, the intelligence, the divine spark. The Mercury represents the spirit, the vital force, the animating spirit, chi, prana. It is a subtle spiritualized feminine aspect. So where the sulfur of the soul is a male aspect, the spirit is a feminine aspect of the one. Pure energy. It bridges the air and water elements, the spiritual world of the material world, the volatile and the fixed. It is the sulfur, the consciousness, right? Which directs the life force through the body. Directing more of the life force through more refined bodies or vehicles is the course of nature and evolution. Alchemical work strives to create and fortify an incorruptible spiritual body, of which the physical body is a reflection, right? So we have our body, which is the sulfur, right? That the reflection, as we talked about in the mirror, is the other bodies, the spiritual body of the physical body is a reflection, right? So as we see these things work together, this is why within Bailey's work, we're talking about the soul and the body becoming conjoined, right? That we actually bring the soul down in the body, that we no longer let the animal nature, the instinctual nature run our bodies, right? We bring into the soul consciousness, into the body, and through the spirit, this is all taking place. Any comments or questions on the idea of the bridges of the male and female energies, or of this reflection? All right, we're going to move into the three kingdoms: the vegetable, animal, and mineral. To the alchemist, everything is alive and consists of a body, soul, and spirit, or salt, sulfur, and mercury. This is true in the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the mineral kingdom. That the plant world and the animal world are filled with living beings is obvious to all. The mineral world is generally looked upon as non-living because we only understand carbon-based life. We only understand carbon-based life, right? But to the alchemist, the mineral world is also teeming with life and consciousness, just as much as the other two kingdoms. The process of alchemy reach into each of the three kingdoms in order to bring its subjects to a higher degree of perfection. In alchemy, all things are evolving, but consider to be exposed to a wave of energies becoming involved in matter as well, and thus subject to hindrances and impurities from matter, not ready or mature enough to evolve beyond a certain level, corruptible matter. As a result, the energies of life are weakened and the energies of matter predominate, when it is the energies of life which should predominate. The energies of life should predominate, right? The alchemists believed that by understanding nature's law and applying them with art, that it is possible to remove hindrances to the evolutionary wave so that the energetic waves of life can predominate. So there is an evolutionary wave, but what we want to do is have the energies of life predominate and lift the subject toward perfection. Nature is the greatest alchemist of all. She has all the time to complete the process of evolution, which is constantly unfolding around us like a symphony. The alchemist seeks to assist in this evolution, utilizing nature's own laws and methods. In the laboratory, the alchemist can demonstrate the nature's laws at work and can speed up the process. So where oftentimes we, as sentient beings, do not see the mineral kingdom of having sentience. But the alchemist sees all things as having sentience. Why? Because of the law of one, right? We are all one, we are all sentient, we are all made of the same material, and we are all made by conscious mind. This is why when we get into stone medicine or other things, we actually can see that there are entities, there is consciousness within stones and other elements of the earth that we would consider dead or dormant. You know, you're as stupid as a rock or whatever. That's just because we don't see those consciousnesses of material that's been around far longer than we have, right? The biological body passes away very quickly. The mineral body, not so much. And with that, the consciousness of those minerals and other forms of, say, rock or sediment, they take a long time to maybe communicate as well. They're on a different timeline than what we are. So sacred cycles. Early observations of nature reveal that she moves in cycles, right? We talked about this many times. Cycles, not circles. That there's a rhythm to everything. Vibration is a periodic event, circular in nature, but cyclical in form, right? Everything we see, everything we know of its vibration, and because of this, there are certain harmonies established between living things. From early times, people have observed the stars in order to understand the rhythm of nature. This is what Giselle was talking about with the pulse, this rhythm, this pulse. If one intends to help the process of evolution, we're talking about this ascension, this waking up, this is really an evolution process of our consciousness. If we want to help that process, one has to keep within nature's laws. Right? There are natural laws that we must stay within in order to complete this process. You would not go out and plant lettuce in the snow. So it is in the laboratory where the alchemist would await a specific time to carry out an operation in order to capture the momentum of subtle force. There are many such connections between gardening and alchemical work. I think Dr. Bear would agree with that. I think that the more that we actually get our hands in the soil and begin to see these forces at work, we actually begin to see this alchemical process. So within alchemy, I'm trying to relate it back to some of the other topics we've talked about, that we can actually begin to see these subtle bodies at work, right? The three bodies that we talk about, the body, soul, and spirit, as it relates to these ideas of alchemical salt, sulfur, and sulfur, mercury. And it is the goal of the alchemist to separate these three bodies out within plant, mineral, and animal to their certain states through different methods. And we're not going to get into the different methods now, but basically you're taking a plant and boiling it down and getting the vapor, and then the residual matter that you have is the salt. And then what you can make from that is alcohol, right? You can let that ferment and you get the mercury. And then we combine those all back together in their perfected state and create a spirituric.
Where do you get the mercury?
From the alcohol, from the fermentation.
It turns into it?
Yeah, all plant matter will actually begin to congeal into a mercury, right? Well, you can, if you ferment anything, you can actually get an alcohol from it, potatoes to, whatever you want. Some have higher levels of mercury, but
Yeah, I didn't understand where the mercury came from.
but again, we're not talking mercury like mercury poisoning, right? This is, when we say mercury, we're just talking about the spirit body,
Oh, thank you.
not mercury as them.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Sorry.
Yeah. It just says when we get salt, it's not always salt, right? It's just, it's the plant matter itself. So once we, the way that the alchemical process works is that we steam it, right? We take off the liquid. We then have this, you know, that we can ferment. And then once that's fermented, we can take that and squeeze it down. And we can then burn that into ash. And then we create salts from that. And then we mix it all back together again into a refined body. And this is really where Alice Bailey's going with this idea, right? Of as we progress through the white magic, as we bring the soul into the body, right? As we begin to transmute and become a perfected state, that through that resonance of the perfected state, we can bring in new energies that will allow us to expand into the new evolution of where our consciousness is going. Any questions before we close out here, or comments?
Back to what you just said, then if we have, well, a perfect, as we perfect ourselves, or, and, you know, increase evolution, if you like, then we could manifest better things, better ideas, better organization, eh? Yeah. Also, I've heard that people that that has the vision to see the aura, or see the inside the body, if you like, or the vibration, they will see our chakra having more vitality, if you like, you know, more radiance, you know, that kind of thing. So I can see that from what, you know, it's explaining here.
And the, you know, the reason that I cover this material and that I really think it's important is that the alchemist says you must first understand the theories, right, before you get into the praxis. So the more that we can actually understand these theories of alchemy, of transmutation, of the wave, of how nature works, the laws of nature, as we begin to develop our practices, whether it be biogeometry or alchemy itself, we can then begin to actually see how they work and actually hone our practice to be the most beneficial, utilizing the 4 elements and these sacred cycles. So as we go forward, we're going to concentrate more on the theory of the practice, but in order to manifest, we have to be engaged in the practice. That is the one thing that Robert Bartlett points out also. We can theorize all we want, but until we actually engage in the practice, we will not see the effects. The effects only take place as we do the practice. So that's why I'm trying to put forth different modalities that we can use to form a practice, whether it be meditation, whether it be Alice Bailey's work, or alchemy, or biogeometry. First learn the theories and then begin the practice, and through the practice we will transform. And we will transform our reality. We cannot merely just transform through the theories. You must transform through the practice. Any questions or comments on what I just said?
Yeah, I have a comment. Well, so on the question of practice, actually, I find that you practice in life, in terms of spiritual alchemy, like you can practice without having the consciousness of practice, and then you look back. You look back, and that's what I've been going through, and I'm thinking about. I love this book. It's written very clearly. Like there are different stages of alchemy in terms of process. I think there are 7 stages. And I look back at my awakening journey and how I went through the alchemy. So I did not have the theory, but I was deep into being and living.
Mhm,
and I was practicing alchemy without
Mhm.
knowing it.
mhm,
I think that's another possibility in terms of learning,
mhm,
being an alchemist.
mhm.
Yeah.
And that's why I kind of stress the different views that we have, not saying any one is specifically correct or wrong or one's better than the other, but it's our choice, right? It's our choice in how we want to practice our art. And as we've talked about, that each of us is a different ray, right? With different aspects of our personality that we were given, not because it's bad, but because we're individuals, because it takes many individualizations to actually create the whole. So as to see all things as one, but that we are unique within the one, and that we bring specific gifts and abilities to build the one in the creation of matter, that this is why we individuated in the first place, right? We could have chose to stay with the one, but for some reason we all decided to incarnate here in matter. And when we did that, we also, have the ability to bring in unique gifts and skills through our individual aspects to create together through the collective consciousness the realities, and to actually expand into this next consciousness level where we're no longer just concentrating but expanding. Any more comments or questions before we close out?
Being that we're in Aquarius
Mhm,
as a group, finding a group, working in a group,
mhm,
work, it has more impact. Like we can do more.
mhm,
And when we're in a group, the heart, like you can feel the heart opening.
mhm,
Yeah. In a group setting, kind of thing. So
And this is the idea of the hermit in the tarot. The tarot the hermit holds his light because he spent time, in theory and in study. If you look at his feet, they're frozen on the stone because he's actually doing no practice. And once we get into our heart and can create relationships, and this is a bit about what Cosmic was talking about earlier, about the relationship of relating our energies and our rays with others. It's very difficult. It's much easier to be a hermit, right? It's much easier to separate ourselves from the collective, right? From the others, because we can't embody or embrace their energies. This is what Jung called the relating function, right? How do we relate to those other energies, right? That may be shadow to us, but how can we take that shadow energy and incorporate it back into ourselves and understand it? Rather than always trying to oppose it, giving it more energy and more solidity in matter. But how do we embrace it, bring it in, be as water, bring it in, and incorporate it and see the benefit of what is happening rather than just the detriment of what I don't like. So to have a group to be able to even come together is a huge, area of the heart. And as we expand the heart, we'll see more and more people come together, and there'll be more acceptance, right? There'll be more observance rather than trigger or emotional, right? But the key is to observe and not to get caught up in my desire, because once I get my desire, I'll get triggered. Once I get what I want, or I have a certain, expectation for what is to happen, I can no longer observe. I can become polarized. So to stay neutral and observe in a group with acceptance, this is where the heart begins to work. This is what we would call, the unconditional love, that we give that regardless of what your polarity is. And that's going to be our challenges moving forward in this heart space, in this area of expansion. Because as we contract, we become hermits. As we expand, we become a community of conscious selves, of conscious souls working together. Any more comments before we close out? All right. So with that, this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you from the Rogue River with the Walter Russell Secret of Light group. I don't know for sure what we're going to talk about next week, but I'm sure we'll find something. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and give us some comments. And again, we'll see you next week with something. Or will we see you next week? I don't think I'm going to see you. I think is next week Thanksgiving? No, it's the following week. So we'll see you next week. We probably won't see you the week after. But thank you all for coming here. Thank you all for being a part. That's always enjoyable. And keep up the good work. Keep doing the practice. So with that being said, see you all.